There we go. Okay, so like I said, last week we talked about some of the light source types that you have available in Maya, specifically in the Arnold rollout here, or the shelf. Sorry. And like I said, they may be a little limiting, but if you come in here and you make Arnold lights like this one right here, and if you put enough if you put enough energy, meaning like if you turn these intensities and exposures way up, you can mimic some of these other things that you might need to do. Like I said, the sun and all these really bright things, really bright objects or big objects or whatever it might be. But there's other tools that you can use to not have to sort of take this default really basic square and try and make something else out of it. Okay, so like I said, last week we talked about so there's mesh lights, and then we talked about the sky systems, like the physical sky, the light portal being like really kind of a specific thing for people who do architectural work and things like that. So you can kind of ignore it, to be totally honest with you. And mesh lights being, objects that kick off light. So if you wanted to make like fluorescent tubes, so you'd model up the tube, and then you'd make it a light emitting object, right? So that, instead of just being sort of a little plane like when I made this light, which I could stretch, to be sort of light tube like, but if you really needed to be accurate, you'd want that to be a tube instead of just a long plane like this, right? Usually these are situations where you actually want to see the light, like you're gonna put a camera up here and you want to be able to see that this is actually a fluorescent tube or something like that. Okay, not this. So that's not the instance that you want to use one of these lights. You want to use a mesh light that's like coming off of an actual, I would make a tube that's not a giant thing like this. I would make the fluorescent tube in some way, and using the normal tools. Oops. You see what I'm saying? And then this would become my mesh light using an Arnold tab. This guy, mesh light. Okay, so that just changed my geometry into a light emitting object that I get. So I still have my object underneath there, but I also have the intensity and all that stuff controls. Yeah.
So if it's going to be an object that's emitting light, it has to be a mesh.
Yeah. I mean, unless there's a way to fake it with a normal light, because when this is something you don't want to do unless you absolutely have to, because it's not very efficient. Like, okay. It's like like I said, a good example is like, if you absolutely, we're going to sort of feature this, like you wanted to make a shot where, you were looking at the light in the ceiling or something and then some stuff underneath, right? Otherwise, like the lights in the ceiling here, beyond the, beyond these little grates or whatever, there are, fluorescent tubes, right? Well, since I'm not actually seeing them and I'm just seeing the effect of them, I would use a long light like this hidden up into the light fixture. Not that long, but you put that and maybe another copy, because there's probably a pair of them. Whenever you can, you want to use the native lights that they give you. It's just sort of it saves rendering time, essentially. Like however they write these things, they write them with the idea that you're using their lights, right? And it's not the end of the world. It's just gonna bump up your render times, because your computing mesh lights is more time intensive. So yeah, it's more of a, when you need them, they're there. Or I guess another good example is like an irregularly shaped light. Obviously, I can get a disc out of this. I can get a cylinder and a disc out of this. Okay, and that handles a lot of situations, but not all of them. Not all situations, obviously. So like if you think of like like in some cars, the way they have like bent light that goes like, shines down on the floor because there's these little grooves in there, that kind of thing. So, it's a really irregular shape. That's a way to get around that. You can make that shape, and then it would be glowing. Neon's another really good example. Neon light comes off of these tubes. There's no way to fake that. There's no way to bend the there's no bending of these guys. There's no nothing but making scaling them or moving them or whatever you need to do. Okay. So like I said, a neon, you could model neon, but since it emits light, this would be a perfect example of why you would want a light emitting object. So you'd make your letters out of tubes and then turn it over into light emitting objects. Okay. And then photometric light we talked about. So we talked about all these are the ones that Arnold has by default. Okay. Now we also talked about the way that Maya has its own renderer. Okay. And renderers are just a plug-in, okay, and they all support different things. They all support slightly different features. They by and large they do the same thing, but they do them in different ways, I guess is the best way to say it. So sometimes things are compatible, sometimes they're not compatible. The beauty is that all of Maya's standard lights that you get here in the create, okay, just where you have polygons and all the we've been in here before. There's a light rollout too, okay? And so all of these light types, let me make sure they are. Volume light is potentially not actually. So all of these light types that you get in Maya that work with the Maya standard renderer that we've turned off, essentially, we've switched, or actually by default, it seems to be switched in 2018. So the good news is that you have these other light types available to you to do different things, and they are definitely, they also, they do some cool stuff. So I'm going to delete the lights that I had here from Arnold, okay? So now at this, I get nothing because there's no light in the scene, okay? So your first one is ambient light, and this honestly is really something it's just bad practice to use it, because it creates light that is literally everywhere, and in the real world there's no situation where light is absolutely everywhere. So it just creates let's see, let me turn it up. It's really blue. Well, good. It actually doesn't support that type either. Sorry. So that's good news. So if you accidentally hit ambient light, it's not going to use it. The point is it's like, if you've ever seen like computer animation where everything looks really washed out and there's no shadows and there's no crispness and things like that, that's what ambient light gets rid of. It basically throws light everywhere. So if I switch my renderer here real quick, I'll show you what it does and why you really shouldn't use it. So you don't have to take my word for it. So if I go back to the Maya software renderer, I put an ambient light in there, and I render what I've got here. You notice how that looks like shit? That's because of ambient light, okay? It's like I said, it's everywhere, and that's why you have no shadows. You have, it was an old, it's sort of another one of those legacy things that frankly they should just get rid of. It's like when light was more expensive to compute, this was a way to get some light in places. It looks terrible. So long story short is just don't use it, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache, Okay. So the next light type they have here is a directional light. Now, when we've talked about other light sources before, they actually, like if I go back and I do put another another Arnold light type in here, you'll see. So if I render this, I'm gonna get rid of this directional light that I created and grab this guy. This is the Arnold light I created, okay? So I'm gonna look from above and I'm gonna render that out real quick. Oops, I'm gonna turn it up a lot first, sorry. Okay, a whole lot more, come on. Okay, you see how it falls off? It's like a real light source, right? It emits, but also in this direction and that direction. Okay, it's basically from the face where you see this the green arrow, right? That's telling you its direction, right? It emits nothing from this side, but it emits everything from the front side, okay? And like I said, you can tell that it's essentially going out in a pattern that you would expect. You know, it's not going straight as an arrow. It's going feathering out as you would expect any bulb to do or anything like that, right? So if I brought an object closer to it, it would create shadows. You know, it would create very realistic shadows that are going around the object and in front of the object. And let me turn it back up. Area light. Let me turn it up even more. Okay. So, like I said, you can see it's spreading out in 180 degrees this way, or 180 degrees from its face, which is what you would want out of a light like this. You could think of this as like the way they light photography with like a big light with a diffuser on the front of it, right? Now if I shrink this down, I'll get more directional light out of it, okay? More spotlighty. You see how the shadows here are tighter or closer to the object, whereas if I make it big, really big, I get real soft shadows, okay? So that the point is that this is coming from an object that's large and close to this other this little cube that I'm lighting, right? Now, the farther I move the object away, the more directional it appears to the object, because they're all the rays coming out of it are going, instead of coming, both out of this object and this way around the object. Same thing here. If you think of rays coming out of this object in 180 degrees, some of them are going to essentially wrap around or sort of see the other side, right? So if I move it farther away, like the sun, I do start to get more, and this will probably not be bright enough. Okay, I start to get what I got when I made it small, right? Because, the sun is a relatively small object up in the sky, right? I mean, it's like a little dot, essentially, right? So to us, and the shadows that you often see coming off the sun, that's why they're so sharp, because it's just like a dot, right? So if I come back here and let me pump this way up, say 16 and 20. So remember, so this object is, or this light is way out there, but it's whew, okay. And 8. Still too bright. So I'm just turning down my light. There we go. Okay. So if I come back in here and I look at this guy, I'm getting relatively sharper shadows because it's farther away. When I was closer, I got really diffuse shadows because it's a relatively big object, like so. So if I come back here, too bright and soft shadows. Okay, back away, making the object, so if I'm looking at what the sort of where the object is what the object is seeing, this is huge near it. Okay, back it away, and come to where this guy is, and now it's a little doodad. Okay. The point of this is being, to really do a good sun out of this object, I have to move it way away, make it really small, and really pump up the values, because what I'm trying to do is create essentially just rays coming straight out of it so that I'm getting those crisp shadows, okay? Directional light solves that problem because that's exactly what it does. All the light coming out of it comes from one direction, okay? Just like the sun. You can see it's see that its icon is like just these little arrows. So you just basically point those arrows where you're looking to, throw light. So I'll come back down to this. And now see, I'm getting really crisp sun style, sunshine style shadows, right? and that's the point of directional light. So it's not like a spotlight that spreads out. It's not like a one of these lights, a area light. It's literally just essentially a point light. And really the only place that you pretty much want this is maybe a spotlight, but not really. And maybe usually just the sun, honestly. So if you come over down here, you'll see I'm getting really crisp shadows. Okay. Let me pump it up a little bit more. Yeah, so I'm getting nice crisp shadows just like the sun. So I think you see the difference here. So if I put put this guy back in and even make it larger and say 4 and 16. I'm going to turn this guy off. So if I try that, way too bright again. See, very, so I can shrink this down and I can get almost a point out of it and get it directional and turn it way up. But I'm still getting sort of, I would have to move it very far away to get straight rays out of it, okay? There we go. Okay, so we come in here. So this is from the area light the mesh, sorry, geez. The area light turned way up and moved far away. So this is better, but it's still not quite, straight line. So in the end, for sun and even you could even control this to be a little spotlight. Your direct light is really the way to go. Okay. So the other one of the other light types here is called a point light, and this is a good point light's really nice because as opposed to sending light in one direction, like this the directional light, of course, or it all just coming out of one face, like the area light out of Arnold. A point light emits light in all not all 360 degrees up and down. It's like a point. It's like just a glowing dot essentially, right? So this is where if you a perfect example is like a light bulb or something where you wanted to it's lights coming off of it in all directions, or even a torch or something like that. You'll see I'm getting light in all directions coming out of it, okay? So, like so. There we go. In fact, let me turn my light and shadows on. Okay. So here it is actually trying to sort of simulate what you're going to get out of it, okay? So you can imagine all the situations where you would need something like this, This is like I said, your light bulbs, your torch. There's no reason you couldn't animate the intensity of this thing or anything like that, and a torch would work like that, or any omnidirectional light source. Like any omnidirectional light source. And it will, since it's actually. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm guessing the way you're getting those shadows is you have like another object underneath all of those. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, there's just all I got here, sorry, is a plane and a bunch of little fake city cube dealies. Okay. And then this thing that I just made. Yeah. Yeah, I sort of made this ahead of time and brought it with me. Okay, so any of your light bulbs, anything that kicks off light in all directions, this is what this is good for, okay? But it does just come off of it's a point. There's no making it bigger. There's no making it smaller. It's not really an object. It's essentially a dot in space that kicks off light, okay? So if you actually needed something that gave off light in sort of a volume, you know, like like if it was if you think of a big light bulb, you know, this necessarily wouldn't work because a really big light bulb would actually have some softer shadows because it sort of has some volume. You'll see here, like when I render this, that if I turn it up enough, 25. There we go. The shadows are really crisp, right? And you know, and lots of times that's fine, you know. But if you needed a bigger light, or you weren't liking the really hard shadows you were getting out of this, you'd switch to a mesh light and model what you need, you know. So I guess, so you know, like I'd say, like, you know, if this was supposed to be sort of a ball of light, you know, okay, if this was a little city and I was saying, okay, this is, you know, this is what it should look like, okay? This point light's not going to really do the trick because it is so sharp, okay? Whereas if I turn this into a light, ooh, I've turned that into a light and kicked it up. I'm gonna turn the point light down and turn this guy. Let's see. 8 and 4. You'll notice it's taking more time. So this is still coming out of that object, but I'm getting softer shadows around the sides here because it's bigger. Okay, oops. So it all depends on the effect that you're going for. You know, like I said, if this is supposed to be a volume that that comes down here, all the light coming from one point isn't going to make a lot of sense. Okay, let's do it again. That might be a little big, so say that. So you know, like an explosion is probably a good example. You know, the light from an explosion doesn't come from one dot in space. It comes from, you know, a volume of glowy whatnots, you know. So like this instance, back up a little. But like I said, you'll notice here, like, you know, that point light rendered really quick, whereas this took a little bit of doing and it still looks bad. Like this would actually need to be, you know, have to turn up the settings a bit more. So, you know, I hope you see the difference between the two. You know, point light having a really good, it's quick and it serves a lot of good purposes, but it's almost like another situation where if it's really going to be in your face and it's really important to see it, you're going to have to switch to, you know, a modeled or you know, a light that's turned out, that's from a mesh, you know, and reinterpreted into a light like this. Oof, there we go. Okay, so if like I said, if I come back in here, I'm gonna kill my mesh light. I turn this guy back up. So like I said, if I was trying to insinuate that this was an explosion, it doesn't really do the trick. It looks like a light. It looks like a flash went off in somebody's camera or whatever. Okay, even if I turn it up, it doesn't really. It's not really gonna do the trick. So they have their uses. It's just not every use, you know. It's let me try and think of some other good examples. I mean, a camera flash is a perfect example. All the light comes from, you know, almost exactly one point in space, you know. And if you wanted to make a camera flash on an object, you know, you would just essentially attach this guy, you know, to your. If I took my phone, little simulated phone here, and I moved it into place, you'll actually start to see that it's, you know, it's obviously going to block the back of it. We'll say this is the sort of the, there we go, and this is my little cell phone, and bring it really close, if not right on top of it, put it off to the side. So what you get is what you would, you know, what you see out of a really bad flash, like light blown from one direction, really harsh. Well, not harsh when you have it low down there.
How do you create mesh lights again?
you just whatever you've got in your Arnold shelf, this second one here turns any selected object into a light. It basically adds it to the stack of the object. Okay. Boom. Okay, so pop. See, and it also produces little doodads. This stuff you can get rid of during render time. So, okay, so point lights, omnidirectional, but from just one point, handy, compute relatively fast, and useful, especially with a whole lot of them. Like Christmas lights. If you really wanted to get nuts and make very accurate Christmas lights, you could string these guys together and turn them down so that they're not super bright. Like, I mean, not that this is super bright, but it's bright enough. And you would just stack those guys in there, and they also don't show up. It's not something that renders. If you notice, the lights are here, but they don't show up when in render time. So they're like I said, they're in the scene here, but they actually don't render. So, all right. And our next light type is the spotlight, which is, as you might imagine, a spotlight. So spotlights work. Essentially, spotlight is a directional light, except you get to control how many directions you want it to come out of. So they don't come out of it linearly. They come out of it just like a spotlight. So I'm going to delete all these guys. Okay. And take my spotlight. And so you have choice over. You can change the cone angle, right? So it's handy in that you get to control how much light sort of gets out of it. Okay. So this is perfect for any directional light that you essentially want to control where it goes. You don't want it flying all over the place, or you want it to go in one direction, but you want it to be in a little spot like this. You need like lights that come out of this track lights that come out of the ceiling, work like that. They come down in a direction, but they, since they're inside a recessed, hole in the ceiling, they only sort of spread so far, right? So you can control that, okay? And the second part is they have a thing called a penumbra angle, and all that means is just if I'm at 0, the light is extremely sharp. You see how there's no fall off here, and if I put that out, it just basically feathers the light out. Okay, so it's just essentially you choose how you want the light to. If you want it to be very harsh, you have it down at 0. If you want to sort of spread out, you turn that up. It should render decently. Yeah. 20. Jeez. Keep going. 50. There we go. Now we're starting to get something. Tell you what, 80. There we go. Okay, so a good example of these are headlights of cars. They come straight out, but they don't go everywhere. They come straight out of the front of the car, but they spread out a bit, like you see when you're driving. Like there's sort of a zone where they, so if I was going to mimic that, you just take a pair of these and move them next to each other. So, just like you see coming out of the headlights of a car, maybe that's even a little much. You could even turn the angle up past where it should be. Get rid of this other one. Copy it over. So there's your reasonably realistic headlights. So you see it's coming from 2 sources straight ahead, but they feather off, so they spread out a little bit, but they feather off. Okay. Obviously, anytime you need an actual spotlight, like, you know, like track lighting or anything like that in the ceiling, you know, that's obviously a little tiny spotlight. So, you know, obviously using a spotlight is probably pretty smart. So, so it's just another way to shape the light, you know, like the point light goes from everywhere. The spotlight goes in sort of a cone that you can feather off or not feather off, or, you know, whatever the light type, you know, where you're trying to shape and throw your light is how you make your choice on which one you use. Okay. And not to mention how much you need to see it. You know, I mean, in theory, you know, you take these headlights and they would be buried inside, you know, the modeled up plastic stuff that's inside you know, actual headlights and stuff, and, you know, it would appear as if this stuff, these things were coming out of the headlight geometry versus them being little spotlights there. You know, there's no need to put little point lights in there that are super bright and trying to make the light all come out the front, you know, because essentially that's what's happening. You know, the bulbs inside of a, you know, car, these little filaments that light actually, you know, comes out everywhere, but it's directed forward. You know, there's no real reason to get nuts about that and try and, you know, do that when you have a spotlight and you can just fake it and it looks pretty good and you can be done with it, you know. So yeah, so that's spotlight. Okay, and then there. So and then Maya has its own area light, which is, you know, which is just like the area light in that we were playing with in the Arnold renderer stuff, you know, or shelf, right? It's just this is Maya's version, and I would use if you're using, depending on what renderer you're using, use its mesh, its area light, because it's going to be computed or made to compute specifically for the renderer. Okay, so this is going to do the same stuff, just with less options and be less friendly with Arnold, so you can just skip it. Okay, like I said, volume light is not going to work with Arnold, so we can skip that one too. So, you know, our main thing is directional light for your sun, point light for your you know, your bulbs and your filaments and your omnidirectional lights, spotlights for your spotlights, and then you mostly, unless you're forced to go back to the Maya software renderer, stay away from this area light. So it's really only these you know, these three that are your big you know, the big useful ones. Okay, and then of course, you know, the stuff that's in the Arnold rendering side. So one thing I wanted to we talked a little bit last week. I'm going to go back to the Arnold rendering types, light types. Okay, and we talked about physical skylight really briefly. Okay, but I wanted to go back over it because there's a lot more to it that you can sort of play with, and you can do different things, especially in tandem with some other light types, right? Like, so Arnold's physical sky model, if you look over here, what it's doing is it's actually, and like I said, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, is it actually simulates stuff in the atmosphere so that your horizon is foggy. I don't know if you can see, so let me render it out just because it'll show up. Okay, so you see down here where, you know, if you look straight up, your sky is going to be bluer. So I'll look straight up. Doesn't look like I'm looking straight up, but I am. Oop. Not straight up, but right there. Am I upside down? Yeah, I'm upside down. Hold on. Oh, I'm below the ground level. Okay. Here we go. So your sky starts to get bluer as it goes up away from the horizon. But another thing that it's doing is it actually creates a simulated sun in there. Okay. So if you look, and then down here, where my objects are, I'm actually getting I'm getting shadows and everything. So what it's doing is it's actually simulating an entire sky for you, which is both good and bad, depending on what you're trying to do. So, you know, all this blue that you're seeing in through here, you know, this is all the, if you think of one big diffuse light source, that's why it's putting blue on all these objects and everything. Let me go down here. So I'm gonna turn off the sun. You see, you have the option to turn off the sun. So if you look here, you'll get what is essentially like an overcast day style lighting, okay? Eventually. There it goes. Okay, so without a sun, you see you get very, very, very diffuse shadows because the light is everywhere, like in a giant dome around the whole thing. Okay, because it's a giant dome like this. Okay, so all this is sky, and that's why when you come back down to your objects here, I'm gonna turn the lights back on. There we go. When you come back down to the lights down here, you're getting that diffuse light that you would get out of a sky. Okay, so but if I come back here, and you have lots of options here. Okay, and that you can change sort of you can sort of choose what time of day you essentially want. Okay, so if you come back to the physical sky rollout here, so you'll see turbidity is essentially like how much like junk is in the air essentially. Like I know this is probably pretty small on it's small on my monitor, so it's small on your monitor, but when I turn this up, you see how the sky gets less clear. So it's like when I turn this down, you get a more perfectly blue sky and a cleaner horizon, right? It never gets rid of it, but it gets rid of a lot of it. Okay. And then the next things generally just deal with the where you want your sun in the sky. Okay, so if you come back down here, the elevation, it doesn't mean elevation like in the sky. It means the elevation of your sun in the sky. Okay, so if I put it way up high, you see how it clears out and everything. Whereas down here, I'll get like morning sky look. It's a little low. Let me turn it up. 3. So I get more oranges and blues and things like that. Okay. Yeah, there we go. You can actually see it. So this looks like sunset. So the lower I come down on the horizon, the more sunset like it's going to get, which is cool. I mean, it handles all that stuff for you, right? So if I go to 90 degrees, which is basically the sun almost completely overhead, midday or whatever, you'll see, really, really bright. So I'm gonna turn my sun back on. So, that looks like midday, like this, you can see I'm getting almost no shadows. Okay. So if you think, so when I say elevation, if I zoom back out here, what that's saying is it's my sun, this is 0 degrees to 90 degrees, meaning directly overhead, and that's as high as it'll go, right? So that means it's going to be 100% above everything here. So if I come back and I render this, I mean, it's going to look really weird because they're going to be the sun's going to be directly above. So I get literally no shadows, and it's just very strange. So you just choose what you're trying to what you're trying to simulate. You can pretty much essentially think of it as this is about 6 a.m. in the morning, whereas this is about whatever 3 in the afternoon or something. The highest time. So if you think of this as time, you think this is either dusk or morning, whenever the sun comes up in the morning, and this is it at the highest point of the day. Like I said, somewhere between 2 and 4 o'clock, depending on also where you're at in the world and all that stuff. So how you compute that is sort of your business. But there are things out there to help you with that, those scripts where you can say, I want this time of day and all that stuff, and you'll get something that's more realistic, or that is very realistic. Because depending on where the sun is in the sky and what time it is something that you can easily compute with, if you know how to do it, which I do not, but other people do somehow. Okay, so you see here. So I'm essentially, I've got extreme morning or extreme sundown. So what I'm trying to get at here is that this is built into this sky system, and it's like I said, it's both good and bad, because there are some things that you can control. You know, the turbidity being the clearance of the sky is, you know, one of the things that you can do. You can actually change the apparent size of the sun if you wanted to. You can play with the tint of the sky and the tint of the sun a little bit, but you know, that's largely it. And you can also, if you just if you rotate the whole thing, you know, the thing is just an object, so it's like if you want it all coming from that direction, then you can do that, or you know, or if you want to change its direction of where it should be coming out of, you can put it anywhere you like. Okay, I usually like to use this. The sky system is nice, but I usually turn it off and add a directional light, so you can put the sun exactly where you want to. Or did I leave one? Oh, I left one. You know, so this allows me to like put it where I want. I can, you know, make it more intense if I like. It just gives you a little bit more control. Like I said, it's cool that this does this, but you know, like I said, it's a little limited in that it just, like I said, its level of controls is a little not where you want it. So here I have my. So that's my directional light that we talked about before, the little simulated sun. So if you go in here and you select your big simulated sky system, you can turn off the sun, you can get a nice sky out of it, and then you can, you know, place your sun anywhere you like. Okay. Now there are other ways to do the sky that, I mean, you may wonder, you know, right out of the gate, like, well, what about clouds and everything? The thing doesn't do clouds. It doesn't do anything like that. You know, this is something that there are other methods, and we'll get into that later, that use maps essentially of the sky to you know, to both light the system and also, or light the scene, and also you know, give objects something to reflect and all that stuff. So that's a completely different method, and we'll loop back around to that. But you know, so that's obviously another big problem with this physical sky system, is that it's assuming there isn't a single cloud in the sky, period, whatsoever. You know, I mean, you could model some if you wanted to, or some fake ones or whatever, but it's just not worth it. There, like I said, there's ways around this. This is literally just a perfect day simulator, essentially, like perfect day. So it has its uses, but they're a little limited. Okay. All right. So there's my sun object. Another thing to remember too, when you go through this, is lights that are hidden. Like if you put them on layers and you hide that layer, it turns off the light according to the renderer. So that's something that's both good and bad depending on, you know, what you're trying to do. If you need to control, you know, lights and turn them off and then turn another set on for a different, you know, setting or something like that, that's great. If you forget about them and all of a sudden your scene's black, that's why, and it's a pain in the butt. So it's just something to be aware of. So it's like if I went in and, you know, hit everything off, you know, I'm not gonna get anything out of any of these lights. Oops, there's another one. Okay, so they have to be visible or they're not going to do their job. Okay. All right. So, anybody have any questions about light types? Any of these light types?
For the what's it called? The mesh light. Does that mean like if you have a thing that emits light, you would need to like make a duplicate of that thing to have like the thing and then have the light?
Yeah, because it goes around it. I mean, you'll notice if we do exactly that, like if we went back over here and turn this into a mesh light, it's going to do stuff, you know, in the scene, but it's not going to show up anymore. It's not an object. So you would, yeah, that's exactly it. You would, you know, create another, you'd create a dupe, turn this into a mesh light. You know, you pretty much, you put a material on it that's glowing, you know, or appear to be glowing, which we'll come back around to, or we will get to when we talk more about materials. But you would need this being the thing that you want to see, and this being the thing that you want to give off the light. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Would you have to scale it down or anything?
Generally, you can just, yeah, I mean, I would put the object inside the object. Like I would scale out the light emitting stuff, like so. And like I said, our inner object would have to be light emitting because it's there, but the light's going to come out of the normals of the polygon. So it's always this way, you know, it's going to be out. So it's not illuminating like if I move this away, it'll illuminate the object. See? But if it collides with it, since it's not illuminating on the inside, it won't. So it'll be, so it should get something, yeah, right here. See where it's actually cutting into the, let me turn that up. Yeah. So what you'd actually do, like I said, is go around, you could put this right over top of it, because that doesn't show up, but the inner object, you'd make what they call a self-illuminating material that doesn't actually give off, well, sometimes they give off light, but they don't give off, it's not smart to do your lighting through materials. It's really sort of computationally shitty. So you want to just make it so that it looks like it's glowing and let the actual light throwing be done by another object, by a mesh object like that. So, but I'm not going to dig into the material part. I'll do that later after we're done talking about this, okay? Anybody else have any questions about the new light types that we talked about, or even the ones from last week? Yeah, Violet.
Turn off the light. You just put it on another layer and hide it?
Yeah, you just hide it. Yeah, you generally hide it. They don't really give you a switch. Maya's not into like switches like that, so yeah, you would just hide it away is the best way to do it, because you don't want to lose your settings. So you know, if you just do that, it's gonna be gone, and it's not gonna do anything in the scene anymore. So I have no lights. Okay. Anybody else? Question? Lighting types? Lighting this? Lighting that? Anything? Okay. It's cool. Like I said, I mean, these systems are great, you know, to get some basic stuff done, but, you know, unless you have an absolutely perfect day there, it's a little odd, you know, so. Okay. So, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go back into the settings about some of the render settings that we've been playing with. So remember last week I just said, you know, hey, just mash this button and you'll get something out of this. You know, there's a lot going on behind here that we've literally just jumped right over the top of, just so that we can start, you know, seeing objects, you know. But I'm going to go through some of them today, just so that we, you know, so you know where some of these things are, and also some of the things that you might want to tweak until we sort of get even deeper into it. So if you click over here to two doors down from the little clapboard with the, you know, the one that's basically renders a frame, that's the render settings button, and we've seen this before. It allows you to change your renderer. You know, Arnold seems to be the new default. Also, I did notice for sure that it loaded up my shelf and all that stuff from last week, so these things do retain. So unless they do really, really wipe your personal stuff, if you make new shelves and stuff like that are your own, they should stay in there. So that's good news. Okay, so so I go to my render settings here, and as usual, there's a bunch of tabs to give you a bunch of stuff here. All renderers are going to have a common tab, okay? And all that we really need to be worried about right now is essentially the things that control how big of a render you want to make, and if you want to save it, essentially, right? So in Maya, you can. So if I come down here to image size, I can type in any, you know, image size I want. You know, like right now, it's doing 960 pixels by 540 pixels, and that's why when I turn this guy on, that's what's showing me exactly what it's going to render. It's not going to render any of this stuff outside of there. It's going to render a window this big, that big, right? If I change that to say 1200, okay, it's going to change my aspect ratio Oh, no. 1 by 1200. Did I turn on the wrong? Sorry, hold on. There it goes. Sorry, I actually clicked the wrong one. So this is that's a different one. So two down here. That's showing me exactly what it's going to render. See how it's wider than it is tall. Okay, so if I mess with this 400, see it even smaller, whatever. Okay, so you have complete control over. If you wanted a square image, you can do 800 by 800, and it's going to give you an exact square. Whatever you need to get out of the software, it'll give to you when you go to render. So it's important to set this properly depending on what you're trying to do, and also your render times and what you sort of can deal with from waiting for renders. Okay, so when you're working, generally speaking, it's really smart to work in basically half the final resolution you need, right? So they have some presets right here. Okay, it's custom because I just typed in some numbers here. Okay, but they have all kinds of them. They have 4K square, which is literally 4000 by 4000, blah 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 blah, and then they have like your HD TV presets, right? So if you just hit that, that's for a 1080. I'm sure you've seen on your TV where it says 1080p or 720p or whatever. That's what these mean. It's just how many pixels are. How many pixels high do you want the image? So a 1080p TV shows 1080 pixels up and down. So that's what it's going to kick out here. So if I render this, see, I'll get a lot bigger image. In fact, it should fill this whole screen because this monitor I think is only 1080p right now, so that I can broadcast all, or spit it out to all these things. But you see how long it's taking to render, right? So it didn't take forever, but if this was longer, there it goes. You could see how you just sitting here to see how it's going to turn out. Takes a lot of time. So it's really smart to just essentially half everything. Oops. 1920 by 1080 device aspect. There we go. So 540 by, oh, there it is. Sorry. So 1080p. Turn on your maintain width and height ratio. This means if you type one number here, it'll scale the other. Like it won't change the aspect ratio, meaning like the relationship between height and width here. So if I type in 540, I get 960 by 540, right? So if I hit render this time, it's going to do it in about a quarter of the time because it's rendering about a quarter of the pixels. So the last file just took maybe a minute or something to get done. This time, almost instantaneously. This won't stay the same, because this is a really, really simple scene. But you can see it just boom, 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 boom. It's done. So when I was doing the full resolution before, it took about a minute or so, or which, like I said, isn't a big deal. But when you get into render times that are 10 minutes, if you can shave that into a quarter, obviously you want to, right? So I can still tell what's going on here by doing this quarter size render, but I'm not sitting around waiting for it to happen. Okay, so like I said, your best defense is just to turn that off when you're ready to act. When you really think you got it down and you actually do want images out of it, that's when you start kicking these numbers up, and either doing it bigger or even 3/4 size. Whatever you can shave off that will save you time sitting around watching renders happen. Okay, so that's the big that's the big thing in here is your your file output is where things are saved. The frame range is if you're doing, if you actually have animation and to render, which we do not. You can choose how big, what frames you actually want to render. We'll get into that later. And then what camera you want to render through. Now we only have the perspective. Well, we have 4 cameras actually. We have front, side, and top, and a perspective camera. This is actually a camera that we're looking through. We talked about that. By default, it's going to be whatever viewport you have selected. So if I switch around, it will render these side views if I really want it to. but I don't want to, so I'm not going to do that. So you usually don't have to mess with that as long as you have the viewport selected that you want to actually render. And then we just talked about image size and stuff. Okay. The render options we don't need to get into right now. The only other thing that we can talk about is file output, because if you want to start kicking out files to like send over to Photoshop or do whatever you want to do with them, go on to your next step. This is where that's all done. So you have a bunch of different file choices: JPEG, PNG, DBXR, TIFF, EXR, Maya, and Maya to Arnold shaders, which you don't need. I've never seen anybody use Maya's file format, image file format, so I wouldn't worry about that. JPEGs, they're gonna compress your image as you render it, so it's really not a smart idea to render directly to JPEGs. PNGs are fine, but if you really want to do any good stuff with it, you want to use the EXR file format. EXR file format was invented at ILM in the early 2000s, and it's basically a standard that can contain both image data and also other types of data. We won't have to get into that right now, but it's a really great file format in that it handles big files and extra stuff about the scene inside an image file. So you see stuff, but there's actually stuff in the background to tell you about like which object is what, and it gives you separate channels for like, say you wanted to add more reflection to an object after the fact, you can put a channel in there that's just reflection, and then in your compositing program you can add more reflection to an object because it's separated out. So EXRs contain like a JPEG or whatever that that you might have seen in the past. There's nothing else in the file. It's just an image file. It's just a description of the pixels, and then it's compressed, and bam, that's all great. EXR can contain almost an unlimited amount of extra data, so it's really handy. And I think we have nuke here. Yeah, so nuke handles all that stuff. So if you're going to do a simple animation, kicking out to PNGs is just fine. EXRs is a much better much better choice, but it's kind of like when you're ready for it kind of thing, because there's a lot more stuff to handle in there. So mainly choose PNGs, and when you're ready, choose EXRs. Okay, and then all you need to do there is you can set a file by default, it's just going to use the name of the scene. This scene doesn't have it actually does have a name. So, but you can rename them, like Cityscape A, and then, boom, boom, boom. And so down here, it's going to say, how should it render those, right? So if I was rendering a sequence, I would choose like this option. So it gives you a little preview of what your files are going to look like when they're done, right? So it says here, file name Cityscape A _ dot and then 001. So that would be frame 1, and then just on and on and on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's how you would create a sequence. You would just make a series of frames that get put together, and there you go. So by default, it's just going to make a file name called Cityscape A, and then EXR, and that would be the end of it, right? And it would give you a warning if you tried to render a batch of files and try to write over the same file. So it's not going to just leave you hanging. So this is a good way to go, because like I said, it's got a name, it's got a unique number, and then it's got its file extension at the end. Okay, so this would all change. So there's JPEG, there's PNG, whatever. Okay. No big deal. Frame padding, you can leave that alone usually. Okay, so like I said, that's the main thing, like, to get to both mess with your image size and how you want it formatted, and also to save files. That's what we're really going to worry about. There's lots of options in here, other options that we don't necessarily need to worry about right this minute, because there's a lot there. So now the next thing is about frame rate. Does everybody know what what frame rate means? Does everybody understand how a frame rate works by any chance? It's cool if you don't, because I'm just not sure who understands frame rate. Okay, so if you've ever seen a piece of film, movie film, you hold it up and it's a series of images, one right after another, right? It looks like it all looks like film. It's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and going forward, okay? And what happens is in like a projector in the past, or when they still used film in movie theaters and stuff like that, one of those pieces of film would go in front of the light and the lens, essentially shoot it out, and then it would move to the next one, show you the next one, show you the next one, show you the next one, okay? And basically by doing that fast enough, it looked like things were moving. That's how film essentially works. It just is throwing images in front of you, still single images in front of you fast enough for you to think that it's moving, okay? And movies since, forever settled in on 24 frames a second, meaning it's showing you for each second of movie, it's showing you 24 of those pictures, right? So it's rifling through them really, really quick, okay? And that's why the reels are, this big, and, they're gigantic, because it's eating through that film. 25 or 24 frames a second, okay? And that's essentially what we're doing here when we talk about, how we want to present our frames per second, right? So before high definition TVs, the frame rate they settled in on was 30 frames a second, okay? So on videotape, they stored, videotape and DVD stored 30 frames of 30 pictures per second. That's why TV used to look different than it does now. It just looked a little weird, because you were seeing more information, per second than you did in the movie theater. That's why movies look smoother, and they just look different than they looked like an old TV. When you looked at an old TV, it obviously didn't look like a movie. Whereas nowadays, when you look at an HD TV, it looks pretty good, because they switched back to that. HD TV runs at about 24 frames a second, just like a movie, right? So the nice thing is that we render less frames, but we render them bigger. We make more. The resolution on a TV was lower, but the frame rate was higher, okay? Now it's kind of the opposite. The frame rate's actually lower, but we're rendering quadruple the amount of data, and especially if you talk about 4K TVs, that's 4 times even that. We're not going to talk about that. So your frame rate is what you choose depending on what you're going to, what format you're going to, and this is only about rendered things, right? Video games are a completely different situation, because they run it as fast as the machine can keep up and throw frames at you. Like if you're a game, sorry, go ahead.
That was kind of my question, because usually 60 frames per second
Right.
is the average.
Isn't it called checkerboarding or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, games. The goal in video game system is to get that as high as humanly possible, so that everything looks real, right?
It's actually interesting. Usually we're about 60, because our eyes see about 60 frames per second.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go far too high,
Mm-hmm.
it tends up looking kind of weird. So the goal is around 60.
There you go.
You could put it higher, but then it's kind of
Yeah,
weird.
you're kind of wasting. It's just wasting. Yeah, frames. So once again, video games are a completely different beast, and it's not. It doesn't. It almost has nothing to do with that, because it's as high as somebody wants it or can deal with it, or like you said, your machine can put up with it. What we're talking about here is making content that goes to an HDTV, or that goes to a web video, or something on your phone, whatever. All those things are 24 frames a second. So that's what we're both animating for and rendering for, okay? Like I said, the good news is that it's pretty much a standard everywhere, and it's not exactly 24 frames a second, it's actually 23.98 blah blah blah, but honestly you can pretty much ignore it and just go 24 frames a second, right? So that's why if I go into the animation or go back to just my classic UI here, you see down here, right here, this is where you choose your frame rate here, okay? By default, mine's doing 24 frames a second now too. So this is more of an HDTV setting. Like I was just saying, it's 23.976 frames per second, which means every once in a while it actually skips a frame. But like I said, you usually can just ignore that. It's not a huge deal. And then up here, this is what TV was, 29.97 frames per second. And it just keeps going and going and going up to 48,000 frames a second, which I don't know I don't know exactly what anybody would do with that. So
Is that like extreme slow motion?
yeah, it is. I don't. So it's strange. So 24 frames a second is all your digital movie situations and just almost all the content you watch nowadays is 24 frames a second. Okay, they tried to make 60 frames a second happen in movies about 4 or 5 years ago, but everybody hated that look. I don't know if anybody saw any. I never saw it, but they were doing that in theaters, and I guess it looked really shitty, so they immediately stopped doing that. So anyway, so that's what we're doing. So we'll be making, in this instance, to make a second of moving video that you put anywhere, we're going to make 24 individual pictures that then move on to get smushed into a QuickTime or whatever the heck the delivery format is. So the good news is this is the default in Maya right now, so you don't even need to mess with it. And then, depending on what you want out of your resolution, you just change it here. It's got some nice setups. Actually, 540 is one of its choices, which is cool. So, HD 540 is the image size preset for as you're testing and sort of working your stuff out. And then when you're ready to go, bump up to 1080 and you'll get this big ass file right here. Generally speaking, files like this, you're not going to just do on one computer. You'll make a bunch of computers here do it. There's a render farm here that has a bunch of computers, and basically all of the beauty of this that system is that since we have so many files to get done and they're all separate from each other, you take a series of computers and you say you work on this one, you work on this one, you work on that one. So if you have 24 computers, you're essentially rendering a second of video or whatever every for one frame. You're essentially getting a second out of it instead of sitting here and watching 24 of them go. And there are farms with thousands and thousands of computers. So obviously they're ripping through them really, really quickly. Like there's one in Germany that I like to use where you say I need 500 frames rendered, and they put 500 machines on it, and you get everything back in 4 minutes. Because they all it is one frame going out to 1,000 machines. So that when that one frame is done, choom, you're all set. So that's how you distribute that work, so that it's not all just you're not sitting there on one computer waiting for all this stuff to happen. So like I said, we can talk about that the actual rendering of sequences some other time, but those are the things to really worry about. What your frames per second down here, in the corner here, which is 24, and I just wouldn't mess with it, and your resolution that you'll get in through here. Okay, and the next thing, the next level of sort of working this stuff out is the button that's actually right next to this render frame window. So when I click that button, what I'm getting out of that is an actual intent of your final image, your final rendered image, right? With all the little bells and whistles turned on and all the stuff, and that's why it takes some time, right? The next thing is called your IPR, and that's called your interactive progressive renderer. Okay, and these are really a relatively new thing, last 5 years or so, but they're really, really cool in that they render. Instead of having to hit a button and wait for it to create images, it's actually doing it live on the fly, okay, and relatively close to what it's going to look like. Okay, so if I click that button, I'm going to get a window, and you'll notice it's not doing the little squares. It's not doing what they call little buckets, right? So I've got this window, and since I only have I can shrink it. I only have one monitor, so I got to deal with it this way. So I have this guy, and it's it's rendered pretty much roughly. If I make a change to my scene, it'll actually re-render the file. Okay. And the great thing about this is you can actually make changes. Okay, so if I find let me get my outliner. I'm going to go grab the sun that I made, my directional light. Oh no, I'm doing this through a sky system. Sorry. So I go and I grab my skylight. No, there we go. Like if I enable the sun, Now I get my sun. So, you know, I can actually literally go in and make changes to this, like my elevation, like I talked about. If I change button, usually sometimes you have to actually like change the view to get it to sort of kick it in the butt to do its thing. But you'll notice that the machine sort of pauses when I do this, right? So kick, boom, and I get a render. And see how I'm getting a spinning globe there. So where is... Okay, so the point of that is that this is a great method. It's just it's taking a lot of juice out of your machine. Like if you start your task manager, like if I make a change and I go back to my task manager, there we go. Well, there we go. Oh wait, I zoomed in on it. There we go. Yeah, see that? It's pegging, like that's the load on the machine, right? So if I move, right, so that means that I can't do a whole lot, you know, in the background. It's not like perfectly live where I'm tweaking stuff and I'm seeing a render. I'm tweaking stuff and I'm seeing a render. You know, it definitely still taxes your machine. But the beauty is you don't have to. Number one, you don't have to wait for a whole frame, and it's also got a pause right here, which is great. So what I could do is I could come in here and, you know, make a bunch of changes, and you see how it's not bogging down or anything, and like, you know, find out what's actually going on here, like delete my sky, and I'm just gonna find out where my light sources actually are. So then when you let it go, okay, nothing, good. So, and I come back here and I say create a light, directional light, I let it go, and I zoom in. So now if I move it, I get a new render. Move it, get a new render. So it's showing you pretty much what a final render is going to look like, just because there are some tricks being done here to get this done quicker. But for the most part, it's what you're going to get out of the renderer. So if I leave this here, now let me bump that up, maybe give it a tint. Okay, and I pause that, but then I hit render real frame. See, it's smoother, it's cleaner. It's actually sort of doing more of the computing. So it's technically two different renderers, but it's a renderer made to look like the other renderer, just also be done in real time. You know, so there it is. This is the IPR renderer, and then this is what they call the production renderer. So they're really close. So there's nothing stopping you from, using the IPR to get a whole lot done and make a lot of changes. Like I could duplicate this, but you can see how there's sort of a rhythm to it where it's like make a change, let go, re-render, and then see it. So it's not bad. I mean, it's not killing my machine. It's just almost like it's sort of bogging through it, So all these things can change. You can tweak them as you go. You can repose cameras. You can make changes to geometry and see what it does. So I just changed that one. I get that. It's really cool. I mean, it's the goal though is to try and get it sort of down to the smallest you can deal with it, resolution wise. And still get something out of it. So in this instance, I might actually even go lower, say like 300. Okay, close. So I haven't changed my aspect ratio, I've just changed my resolution. So when I hit IPR, I get this little tiny window that I can zoom up on, so I still see what I'm doing, but see the render time is way, way quicker. So it's, like I said, it's essentially trying to find like that sweet spot between like, do you actually see anything out of this, or is this worth your time, or do you want the sort of pauses that you get? Okay. All right. So IPR is great. It's just, pausing it is really smart if you really have a bunch of stuff to do that like say I really needed more out of this object and I needed to remodel it. There's no reason for me to sit and watch it, render my changes over and over, So I put it on pause right here, Okay, and then I say, well, that's nice, let it go, and then boom, I immediately get a new render back. Okay. And like I said, the thing to keep in mind is that it's not final, and it's not anything you can render images to files out of or anything like that. It's just an aid for when you're setting things up, because one of the great things that it does, one of the really nice things it does, and we'll move into this too, is you can design materials live right on the object. So this is, like I said, this is something we'll be getting into in time, but I'll show you real quick. Because generally speaking, when you're making materials for objects, you're making them on like a little ball or something like this, and it's not really made in context where you're like, oh yeah, I'm not. If you're not making a bunch of balls, then it's not exactly like the final object. So if I put that on there, and I mess with how I want my object to look. So if I wanted something red and, oops. Don't worry about this part. Like I said, we'll be circling back around to this. This is not, anything. So I wanted a shiny red thing. So this is all well and good, but what's it actually going to look like in my scene? By having the IPR, I see exactly what it's going to look like in the scene, because it's actually on my object. So, if you're trying to tweak something and match something or make something, be exactly the same as something else, having it directly on the object is just an absolute lifesaver, because this ball tells you some good stuff, but seeing it on the object in my scene in context is like 100 times better. Okay. Like I said, don't worry about what we just saw there, and the other stuff. We'll come back around to it. I just don't have we're not quite there yet, but that's coming up. So you can tweak lights, you can tweak materials, you can move objects, you can do all kinds of great stuff. Just turn it down, turn the resolution down, and then either zoom in on it, or you guys have second monitors, so you could put it over where I cannot put it. So yeah. All right. So those are the rest of the light types, and those are the basics about rendering that we want to talk about today. The one other thing that that we haven't talked about yet is the next part is cameras. Okay, so in Maya, so we've talked about we have objects, we have lights. Now we sort of have to figure out what we want to look through to make our images, essentially, right? So by default, Maya creates 4 cameras: a top, a perspective, and a front and a side camera. Okay, and they actually show up here in the outliner. Okay, they're actually just cameras, just like anything else. Okay, and they're just a way to look at the objects. You can actually move these things if you really wanted to. The top and the side and the front and everything. We never do, like when we go with our perspective view and move around. If we zoom out enough, and there we go. So see what it did is that when I selected the perspective view, and if I move, see it rotating around the scene in the top view, because it's an object like anything else. Okay, even though we sort of look through it and you don't really pay much mind to it, it is just a camera like anything else, right? So we can make our own cameras, because you want to. Like the perspective view, you want to leave alone as just an aid for getting around the scene and doing the setup that you want to do. Okay, rendering through it's not a great idea, because it's just sort of like you're constantly moving it. So like if you're trying to make an animation and you wanted to move the camera, or you had a place that you really wanted it to be, obviously you just screwed yourself up because you moved your camera, right? So that's why we want to create our own cameras and use those as the thing we actually render through. Okay, and leaving our perspective and our top and all these guys alone to just be aids in the program. Okay, so they're created just like anything else. Okay, under lights there's another one called cameras here, as you see. Luckily there's only a couple of camera types to talk about, so I don't have to keep talking about cameras. And in fact, it's really they're really fairly simple in that what you have is just a camera, a free what they call a free camera in a lot of programs, and it's literally that. It's just a free camera, okay, meaning it's just out in the middle of nowhere, and you can do whatever you like with it, okay. It even looks like a little camera, and that's great. So, all right, and to if you want to see what it's seeing, you basically go to pan. You choose which of the 4 viewports you want, and you just hit look through selected. Okay, so now we are looking through the selected camera. So if I rotate it, you see I get rotation. Whatever. If I move it, you get movement. Okay. There we go. And it actually functions just like the perspective camera in that all the same stuff, all the same commands that the holding the Alt and everything and zooming in and all that stuff, they work the same way. I mean, this is essentially what a perspective camera is. It's just a free floating camera that you can put anywhere you want and all that stuff. It even deals with like the keyboard shortcuts of like F to focus in on objects. So if I select that, that kind of thing. So this is a perfectly valid way to lay out an animation because like if all I was looking to do was like make a truck camera, go like this or something, or crane up or whatever, and then look down or something, like you just create those keys to do that. Oops, I went the wrong way. There, crane down, we'll call it. Boom. Oops, damn. On. For God's sakes. No, don't mind that. I'll that's coming later, so don't worry about that part. I'm just for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna run through this. Okay, so see how it's moving here, like moving through the scene. So all I did was just basically pose the camera where I wanted it to start and end, and I get animation out of it. Okay. So it's free to go wherever you like and do whatever you like. Like I said, it's literally just like the perspective camera that we've been playing with. It's just you've made another one essentially, and you can name it anything you like. Street cam, whatever. And now it's street cam, and I'm looking out of right here. It says I'm looking out of street cam. It's like I said, it's just any other type of object. Okay. And it's exactly like the perspective camera that we've been playing with, okay? And there's nothing stopping you from looking through, 2 perspective cameras at once. I could select here, go there, go to panels, and look. So now I have my perspective camera, and I have my what I was calling street cam or whatever, So. I still have my perspective cam. I still have my front. It's however you want to arrange these, you can put them anywhere you like. Okay. So, like I said, it's free to move about and go anywhere you like and whatever. Your next one is a type of camera that that I really prefer, and some people prefer. It's all just what you get comfortable with and what you like, but this is one called a camera and an aim, and this is more of a camera system essentially. And what it is I'll show you how it behaves. So if I come in here, and actually, so I just isolated it. What you get there? Let me move it off of the thing. Shoot. Okay, so with a camera and aim, you get 2 objects, right? You get your camera, once again, just pretty much like any other object, okay? Oop, that's not it. This is it. But you also get a thing called a target or an aim, okay? And what that is going to do, let me look through it. So I'm going to come down here, panels, look through selected. I selected my camera, okay? It's always going to be it's always going to be aimed at wherever your target is, right? So if I move, so this is that camera, right? And I come up. Let me try and get it in a better view. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I'm trying to isolate these 2 things out so that I don't have all this clutter, and it's not working very well.
How do you move cameras again?
Excuse me?
How do you look through the
Panels, and then look through selected. You select the camera first. I guess you can see the out. So you can see the output. I'm gonna actually come out here. So so here's my little town or whatever. I'm gonna turn the grid off. I'll get rid of this. Okay. So here are these objects in this viewport, right? So now if I grab that target camera, you'll see how I'm rotating around because you see this little line that's coming out of the camera and going towards the target, right? Like I said, it's always pointed there. No matter where I move it, up, down, whatever, it's always going to be pointing at that target. Now, there's nothing stopping you also from moving the target, right? So the nice thing about this is that it's like to get that out of a freestanding camera, you have to go in and you have to rotate it by hand, or like if I come over here, either you do this kind of stuff, which is fine, where I'm doing the normal zoom and pan and all that stuff. But like if you wanted a perfect pan out of it, so I'm going to look through it in this other viewport. I'd have to rotate it to do this, right? And that's along one axis, and it's really sterile, and I don't know, it just looks odd. Okay, whereas with a targeted camera, all I have to do, and the camera that I've got selected is being shown down here. Okay, if I grab its target, I can animate it, by moving it, and I get sort of more graceful kind of stuff, without having to rotate this thing. You put it where you want your action to be. You can follow objects because the target is right on top of the object. Like if I was trying to follow this ball going down this little street, all I got to do is put my target on it, and it's going to follow it, and animate both actually as they go, and you'll get it following the target perfectly. Okay. So it works out. It maintains the focus on the things that you want to be focused on, and it also allows you to choose where that focus goes. It allows you to pan up. Oops, bad example. That pan up, pan down, without going in and instead rotating. I just find this method like this just weird and clumsy. It's strange. Whereas the farther you move this out, the more subtle the movement gets. Like. See this, if I just, I'm moving this a lot up here, but I'm getting not much change out of here. So it's more subtle, like things that are handheld look good this way. Like if you're trying to do a camera that's handheld, you can just kind of like bob it around and you get something nice. So it's what you get comfortable with. Some people like free cameras like this guy for what you can do with them because they are free cameras, and some people like target cameras because either you just got used to them or you like the way they work. Like this motion that I just did here, like going over the top of something like that, would have required a bunch of rotates and on multiple axes to do it with the free camera. Instead, I just move this guy and I get this nice, because it stays looking right down here at the center. All I got to do is move this guy and I get this nice movement. Okay. So it like I said, it's whatever you get used to. As long as you get the same result or you get what you want, then it doesn't matter which one. Neither one of them are better than the other. They're both equally. They're fine. They're equally fine. So, okay. So the third type of this kind of camera that Maya gives you is just get rid of some of these extras. Aim shape. Okay. Is a camera, an aim, and an up. Now, this camera is essentially an offshoot of the target camera that I just showed you, except it also has what they call like an up vector. And what that means is it's essentially saying, okay, here's the target of my camera. I'm not sure if you can see this. There we go. I think. No. Okay, so here's my camera body. Here's the target. Wait, which one's the target? No, that's the up. See, I find this one very confusing. I don't like this one either. So what the deal is God, I'm already confused. Hold on. There it is. Okay, so there's my up. So if you see what it's doing there is it's tilting the body of the camera so that it's always faced, so that the top of the camera is always facing this way. So it's essentially like a target camera, but why do I have a spare? So that's the target. So it's almost like a camera. There it goes. Okay, so it's a camera with two targets. One that it's looking at, but also one to deal with how the whatever the up is. Because let's see, that's a good. So you see as I move the camera body, you see how it's leaning over because it's trying to point to this up vector, right? So like I said, I don't entirely understand why you would want this, but apparently somebody does, right? So this is my target, this is my camera body, and then this is my up vector, okay? And it's just really weird. It's because that means you have to animate both of these things to make sure that the camera stays upright. So I don't really understand why you would want such a thing. If anybody starts to like this type, please let me know why the heck you like it, because I'm all ears. I think it sucks and it's really strange. So anyways, but that's it. If you need such a thing, then there it is. I don't get it, but maybe you'll understand it. Okay. And then the next types are for 3D, literally stereo stuff, 3D, like 3D movies or whatever you want to call it, right? So what it does is it automatically makes what they call a stereo rig, okay? And what that does is it actually creates 3 cameras at once, okay? So what it's doing is creating 3 cameras because with 3D movies and things like that, you render 2 different frames, what they call between the interocular, and that's interocular is the space between people's eyeballs, essentially, right? So to render a 3D movie, that you render essentially the left eyeball and the right eyeball, and you make a you make a movie out of it, essentially, right? So what it's doing here is it gives you a camera for the middle to essentially just pose, right? But then it gives you a left eyeball and a right eyeball, and so you would animate I think you can only animate. Yeah, you can't animate the outside ones. You can only animate the center one, right? So that's showing you like the average between the two, okay? So I can look through selected, like so. Okay. There we go. So it's looking through, it says down at the bottom here, stereo camera view, stereo camera center. So it's going to always be looking through the center when you say, look through this camera. That's what it's assuming is what you're trying to aim for. So you would lay out the animation using this center camera, and then it would figure out the other 2, it would render the other 2 cameras that then get to put together into 3D, right? And this also, is also a way to visualize like VR stuff or whatever, let's see. Okay, the cool trick that you can do here is if you come in here and you they have in your viewport you have a stereo rollout here, right? Just like we can choose like how we want it to light and all that stuff. You can actually show what they call an anaglyph, right? And what that means is that the red blue the red blue sorry, it's getting late. The red and blue glasses that you can get, to watch cheap 3D stuff. If you put these on here, this would look 3D. So it's actually showing you both on top of each other. And like I said, if you had a pair of those glasses, this would look 3D-ish, depending on how much you fall for this gag. So,
Man, that's so cool.
do you have them? Oh no, okay.
I work at a movie theater, I can bring in a bunch.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Could you? Yeah, so it has those, and there's a couple other types, but this is the really basic, simple one.
This is the anaglyph?
Yeah, anaglyph. Checkerboard, I think, is the one where if you have a 3D, they actually make monitors that will show 3D, horizontal anomalies, blah blah blah. But anaglyph is the one that this is the old school 3D dealy. So that's what it's showing you. So it's showing one eye in red and one eye in blue, and then when you put the glasses on, it's gonna hide the thing. So you could actually see this on your monitor if we had the thing. So the glasses. Okay. The key to this is that this is very scale dependent, I should say, in that it sets up depending on your local your units that you set up. This is the correct interocular, meaning between basically when they've gone to make these movies, they've taken an average of how far apart most people's eyes are, and that's how you shoot these things, right? I don't remember that number. It's like I don't remember the number. So the long story short is it's really important to get your scale of your scene correct if you want this to look correct. You see how like I'm getting objects that are way over here and way over there because the scene is really tiny, right? Like if you think of this as a person's head, and this is where their eyeballs are apart from each other, that's a lot compared to this scene. Like this is a scene maybe smaller than than the desktop, right? Whereas if I was trying to insinuate that this was a city, it's going to look stupid because my interocular doesn't change, but the size of my objects do change. Okay, so if I really scaled the whole damn thing up together. No. Sorry, scales. Damn it. Oops. Sorry. I'm trying to scale there it goes. Trying to scale my scene up to be city size, right? So if this is a person and now I got my city, if I come back over here and I look through that object, see now this looks like it makes more sense, right? The differences between the objects is not so massive anymore. So this would actually probably look fairly decent through those glasses versus what we were seeing before, and that gives you your depth and all that good stuff. So anyways, so that's another thing you can do with these. In this instance, you also don't want to screw with your angle of view, because this is 54.43 is computed about to be the angle of view of people or whatever. So if you're trying to make something that's reasonably realistic, when using the stereo camera, you want to leave it at that. Which brings me back to the camera themselves settings. So all those camera settings that we just looked at were just ways to manipulate the same thing, right? Like, except for the stereo camera is different in that it gives you all this extra stuff, but these other cameras are really just exactly the same thing. So how we control it is independent of the settings. Okay, so if I get rid of my stereo camera and I'm just going to put in another aim camera. Oops, sorry. Where'd it go? That's lights. There we go. And I'm going to look through selected. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to pose this down the street. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. There we go. Oh, it's teeny tiny. That's right. Okay, because I blew my scene up. Now the difference between my camera and my, oh yeah, there he is. Okay, there we go. So now if I look down the street, so I've got my aim target, okay, and I've got my camera body. Sadly, the camera, I think you can scale up the camera body, the little dude that shows up in the viewport, because see how it's just like this dot because my scene is now so big. That's in here somewhere. Object display. There it is. Locator scale. So I'm gonna bump that up so I can see it in my scene, because otherwise it just stays the size it is. Meaning like a little tiny dude. And you can change its color. Blah 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 blah. So okay. So the camera has lots of different settings to mimic real world cameras, as you might imagine, right? So depending on what you know about photography, a all these, your focal length, your angle of view, your camera scale, all, well, not that so much, but your focal length and your angle of view, if you look on your camera and, they talk about a wide angle lens, or they talk about this kind of lens, this is what we're trying to mimic here, right? Focal length of 35 millimeters is essentially mimicking a 35 millimeter lens, which is a medium wide lens, okay? So if I start messing with this number, you'll see, essentially I'm zooming in, right? So if I come way out, so that's a focal length of 2.5, which is, I don't think they actually make any lenses that really do that. So, okay, so if I put it at like 9, which is like a lens you could buy, you'll see if I come in here, see how it acts like a fisheye? Like it's unbelievable. Like I can see a ton of the scene, and it's, like, once again, it's really, really wide, and it looks like if you've ever looked through a fisheye camera, this is what it looks like. I mean, it's objects are distorted out and blown out and everything, and you can see a ton of the scene. So this is a once again a huge simulating a fisheye lens, a incredibly fisheye lens. Okay, so this is where sort of the art comes in, and that you kind of need to choose what you want your scene to look like. Like if you're a person that likes, if you like this wide angle action, then, or this is what you're going for, then that's what you do. If you're like a good portrait lens, meaning for like people, it's like about an 85 millimeter, which is a pretty flat lens. Now you see I'm not seeing as much as the scene. Objects aren't getting distorted out the edges, or it's more zoomed in, you could kind of say. So like I said, it's all depending on what you're trying to do, or what you need to do when you pick your lens. Okay, 55 millimeters is like a good sort of decent middle ground lens, and that's closer. People say that you like 55 millimeters because it reminds you of your field of vision. That's why the 3D camera rig is set up that way. So like you can buy a lens that's 55 millimeters, you can buy a lens at 85 millimeters. So it's all, like I said, whatever you're if you go out there and you look and you start looking at cinematography and movies and things like that, you'll see the usage of different lenses. It's all about what's, different lenses say different things, like really, really zoomed in lenses are meant to be intense. Like if I come in here and I do 120 millimeters and I'm just looking at, one little piece, or I'm getting close on something, like I'm looking at this tank or whatever the heck it is over here, it sort of makes things sort of cramped, you could sort of say, and things are hidden off of the screen, and there's a whole other sort of art to this. Obviously that's why they have cinematography awards and all that good stuff, because choosing the lens and choosing how you want to see a scene is really an art form. So the rule of thumb really is just to play anywhere in the 20s to about 85, unless you're really trying to do something nuts, like if you were trying to make a sniper situation, you could type in 200 and have an insanely, this is a insanely zoomed in lens. You can see how far the camera is away, and it's, oops, it's looking down. I'm trying to find, hold on. The little locators. I've got to locate my locator. It's, I don't know where she went. Well, anyways, what I'm aiming at is, or what I'm trying to aim the camera at, you can see just how zoomed in that is, So if I widen it back out, oops, by going down, so lower numbers are wider, higher numbers are more zoomed in, and they, it's just something to play with, and like I said, it all depends on what you're trying to do. A close-up is a close-up, meaning it's zoomed in and the camera might be fairly close to, like if you're shooting a person, portraits and things like that are done with a reasonably zoomed up camera. So like I said, I would play somewhere nowhere less than 20, unless you're trying to do something really nuts, like this. This is like what a fly sees or something, or whatever, like as it buzzes around. In the 50s is nice, and then 85 is nice for for sort of objects that you're just shooting. And I mean, as you put a scene together, you'll see what you get out of it as you mess with those numbers. Okay. Camera scale we don't really even need to play with. The next thing to be aware of is what they call near clip and far clip. So depending on what you have in your scene, object wise, and the scale of your scene, Maya needs to be able to throw some information out and keep certain information. Meaning, like, if I made a city like I've got here, but this was all detailed, but I was on the roof here and I was trying to look at a fly on the edge or something like that, you've got a scale issue in that you've got a whole world that's this big, but you're trying to focus in on something that's this small. So these programs need to choose some stuff to sort of throw out, is the best way to put it, right? And what it does that with the clip plane. Okay, so if I'm looking through the camera here, if I start messing with this, luckily you barely need to mess with this because it has an auto render clip plane, which it sort of takes into account what's in the scene. But sometimes you'll hit this and you'll be like, where the hell did my objects go? Like if I bring this down, you'll see how everything disappeared, right? What that is a clip plane means like once again, you can just think of it as a plane, literally, where anything beyond that plane is going to get thrown out and anything below this other number is going to get thrown out. Meaning things that are too close to the camera are going to get thrown in the trash, render-wise and viewport-wise, and things beyond the other number are going to get thrown out, right? Once again, usually you don't have to deal with this, but every once in a while you hit this and that you're like I said, where the hell did my objects go? And this is what will solve that. So if I bump that number up, in fact, if I start creeping it up, oops, no, so 5,000, you'll see things start to come back in. 4,000, 3,000, 2,000. There we go. So this tank thing is 2,000 out, so it's clipping it off. So this like I said, this is really one just to be aware of in case you hit a situation and you're like, damn it, where did everything go, or my render didn't turn out or whatever. Watch your clip planes. Sometimes this is what happens. It should handle itself. It doesn't always, and it can be a big problem, or it can really piss you off if you can't figure out what's going on. Okay, so the next tab gives you what they call the frustum display, and all that means is it's going to show you, just like we saw in the spotlight, it's showing you the angle of view of this thing. So anything to this side isn't going to be seen by the camera. Same here. So this is just a cone of what it sees. So you'll see it as I mess with this, it's showing less and it's showing more. Okay. Sometimes this is nice to know, or just be aware. Like know that this is there. Like I said, it's just some. I guess it's something either you get used to and you find valuable, or it's not. Like I find it valuable because, like I said, it's like, okay, I know I'm not seeing this even by looking through the camera. By looking through the camera, I'm not sure which one of these I'm seeing. Well, by this, you can see I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing it because I see it in the frustum. Most programs just call this like the cone, camera cone or whatever. I guess this must be a technical term. You can also display these things, the near clip plane and the far clip plane. You can see them in the render, or sorry, in the viewport. Or no, it'll actually clip the frustum. So if I bring this number down, you'll see it come closer. Really close, actually. So this is telling you that's why. So all this stuff is falling out. That's why you don't see it here. Like this one's in the scene, this one's not. So if I mess with that, you'll see more, you'll see less. I don't know why you turn that on, but you never know. Like I said, some people like that stuff. Okay. Let's see. So I don't think we'll mess with these right now. Okay, man. These just sort of deal with the aspect ratio, like a regular camera. Like I said, you could probably just ignore that right now. Depth of field we won't be getting to right now. Depth of field is a thing, a situation with a camera where things are in focus and things are not. It's a really, it's a nice look, and it's something that actually the renderers and things can simulate, and it's where you set this up, and hopefully we'll get around to playing with that. It actually simulates it in the viewport, which is really cool. So you see how I blurred my scene here, and then I just choose the focus distance, probably 800, we'll say. So see how the front is blurred out and the back isn't. So it's once again it's just simulating this in the viewport, which is pretty cool. And as I turn this down, I'll get more out of it. So these are mimicking real world camera stuff, so that if I rendered this, I could render that kind of blurry foreground, sharp middle ground, and blurry background. It's expensive in the renderer, so you don't do a lot of it, but it's available to you if you need it realistic, for really realistic stuff. So it's really cool. And it simulates it in the viewport. It's probably something I need to turn on. Yeah, so by default, the renderer isn't doing it. It's something you have to tell it to do, which we'll get into another time. So, but that's the basic gist of cameras. I can put as many of them in the scene as I want to, to do whatever you're trying to do. I mean, you put a camera here, you put a camera there. Oh, sorry, there's one other thing I want to go through real quick, and then we'll be all done. It is they have a system in Maya called bookmarks, which is really handy, especially for you can use it with pretty much any camera. And what they do is they essentially allow you to save positions of cameras and pop back to them. So it's like you don't have to like if you move your camera, or if you wanted to, if you had a view that was particularly cool, or whatever you want to call it, you can pop back to it. So you get at that at where was that? Bookmark. Here it is. No, hold on. There's the bookmark. I did 2D bookmarks. Okay, there it is. Okay, sorry. So you get it right there. It looks like a little bookmark, so it'll pop around to your bookmarks. But what you can do is you can make as many as you want. So it's like you pose your camera, and then you make a new bookmark, and you can name it whatever you want. Down street, or like at the street level. So if I move my camera down here and down there, and a new bookmark, street level, level, I can pop around to different viewports, or different, there, apply, street level, apply. Hold on. What the hell? Oh, this is for the front view. Oh, sorry. No, I needed to be. Oh shit. Okay. So the problem is that each camera has their own bookmarks, and I was moving my perspective, but I was in the bookmarks for the front view, right? So I was moving this thing, but I was using this guy right here, and that's tied to this front viewport, right? So to get that, I needed to go into the camera. So I need to be looking through the camera that I've selected, then grabbing my bookmark. So it has none. So if I redo what I just did, sorry about that. I could say new bookmark. So street level, new bookmark. Oops, street level, and then sky view. There we go. So see it now. Now it pops to. Oops. New bookmark. Sky view. Boom. Street level. Sky view. Street level. Sky view. Okay. So the great part about this is that you can also add it to a shelf. So if you get a bunch of views going that help you out, like this, I'm down. I'm over here. To look at an object or to deal with an object or something like that, you can make a shelf out of this. So you can make a view shelf that would pop here, pop there, pop there. You can actually even animate. You could set these up as you know, as a pose to go from here to there or whatever you need to do. It's just a handy way to pop your camera around. Okay, see, so boom, this one's no good. So there we go. It's like boom, 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 and that's accessed right here. It looks like it looks like a bookmark, and you just, you know, you can actually get at them right here. So I can switch sky view, street level. I'm right clicking on this too, by the way. Sorry about that. Boom, boom, and then I think this one's still legit. No, that's no good. There we go. So yeah, right click messes with, you know, brings up the dialog for them. Right click also brings up the current list of them, so if you don't have to have this open all the time to pop between them. So it's kind of a handy thing. You know, once again, it's not something, until you need it, it doesn't make, you know, it's like, who gives a damn, but when you need it, you'll like this. So so there you go. So just the quick other things that are in the viewport is if you click this guy, like if you're, you know, I'm on camera 1 here, if you click this, it'll bring up the options for the camera. So it's basically, you know, select the current camera. You can lock a camera so you don't mess with it, which can be very handy. Once again, like if you have a perspective view that you really like and you're going to render out of, you don't want to move it around. This brings up the options, same thing as select. And then this was our bookmarks. Yeah, and then we messed with this guy too. This is what it's going to render. You know, when you when it's time, you know, when preview wise, what you see in the viewport, since you can make a viewport of any shape, isn't exactly what for sure that is going to render. Only what's in the main square is what's going to render. So this is actually, for any camera, this is really handy pretty much to have on all the time, because it you know, otherwise you think, oh, I see all this stuff, but you're actually only going to get that out of it. Why it's not on by default, I'm not entirely sure, but so yeah, so that's cameras, that's the rest of the lights, and that's the IPR stuff. Remember to resolution down when you're playing with the IPR, pause it, and yeah, and definitely pause it, but it's a great thing. There's no reason not to use it. Just be aware that your computer is going to choke as you do it, and if you don't have a really good computer at home, it's probably going to choke the shit out of it. So that's just what you got to, because it is, once again, like still doing a lot of the main rendering work that you have to do a regular render, but it's just quicker, and you get a lot of feedback. You get feedback much quicker. So yeah, that's it. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions, I'll be here for about another hour. Feel free to ask, but that is it.